mark the seventh Sunday after Pentecost. For whatever reason, though I've only been preaching since 2014, I've preached on this Sunday 4 times, so I'm a bit tired of the meetings, to be honest, and also I'm tired of wolves and sheep. I don't even want to talk about them in church. So I'm talking about something else, which is the secret prayer, which I don't usually preach on. It's particularly theologically rich this Sunday. It's something worth meditating upon. The secret prayer is the prayer that is said by the priest after he completes the offertory rites. It gives a definite shape to the motive behind the offering of the bread and the wine by asking something in particular or dedicating it to God for a specific purpose. It is called the secret because the priest says it inaudibly to God alone, and thus it is so-called in secret what it is said. It is one of the 3 major prayers of the liturgy, the other 2 being the collect, which I just said, and the post-communion prayer, which is after communion. These 3 prayers form the heart of the Mass in the Roman liturgy, and they are meant to shape our thoughts and our emotions as we participate in the liturgical sacrifice. Today's secret prayer says, O God, thou who hast fulfilled in the perfection of one sacrifice the various victims of the old law, accept this sacrifice offered thee by thy devoted servants, and sanctify it with a blessing equal to the gifts of Abel, so that what each one has offered in praise of thy majesty may profit for the salvation of all. The one sacrifice which has perfected all others is, of course, the sacrifice of Christ on the cross, which we participate in here through the Mass. And it sanctified and sanctifies all sacrifices which are offered to God in accord with it or which image it. There are 3 examples that the Roman canon gives of acceptable sacrifices, that of Abel, Abraham, and Melchizedek. Abel offered a lamb, Abraham offered his son, and Melchizedek offered bread and wine. These sacrifices, of course, were not according to the Mosaic law, which had not yet been given, but they do prefigure the sacrifices of the temple and the perfect sacrifice of Christ. This great variety of sacrifices shows that sacrifice is a notion common to all cultures, because each man, Abel, Abraham, and Melchizedek, came from a different cultural background. They were not Jews. But each man felt it necessary to offer something significant to God. Sacrifice is an offering of a material thing to God as a sign of our dependence and gratitude towards Him. It belongs to the virtue of religion, whereby we return to God by various actions like prayer, fasting, almsgiving, some measure of justice for all that He has given to us. In some matters of justice, we can make a full return to the one that we owe. For example, when we borrow $5, we can pay back $5. It's perfect justice. But in other matters, the most important ones, we cannot make a full return. And so we offer something significant from our hearts. We can never, for instance, repay our parents. So we do various things for them, knowing that if we added all of it up, it would not equal to justice. We could never make up for what they've done for us. And the same goes for our country and also for the Lord. So sacrifice is a lifelong virtue. It is not a one-time thing, but an ongoing virtue. It has no limits in terms of time or material that we offer. And it is only fully consummated in martyrdom or at natural death, at which point we become a living sacrifice through accepting death for Christ's sake. St. Thomas says that the human goods consist in 3 things: the soul, the body, and material possessions. So our sacrifices are offered in accord with these 3 things. The sacrifice of material goods should be obvious to us. We can offer our possessions directly to God, as when, for example, you contributed to building this church and renovating it, or indirectly to God, as when we give food and clothing to the poor. Abel's sacrifice was a sacrifice of this type. He offered the best of his flock to signify that God had given him everything, and that all that he had, God deserved the best. Abel was not stingy but generous in giving, because he knew that by giving his best, he would offer a more honest sacrifice, and thus give God his due. The sacrifice of our bodies comes mostly, or particularly, through martyrdom, but in lesser degrees through chastity and also temperance in food and drink. Abraham's sacrifice was of his body because Isaac was his son, and so he was bone of his bone and flesh of his flesh. Through this connection, we can see that while martyrdom is the greatest sacrifice of our bodies, there are ways in which we can and we do participate in that perfect sacrifice, as well as prepare ourselves for it if it is asked of us. For example, a husband and wife present their bodies as living sacrifices through their openness to life in the marital union. The man gives his body in the sense that he provides for his family at the sweat of his brow, and the woman gives her body in bearing and educating children. And this goes for any couple who consistently is open to life in their marriage, including those who suffer from infertility or miscarriages. Because the Lord does not see as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. Those families who do not practice artificial birth control are therefore much more prepared for the ultimate sacrifice of martyrdom than are spouses who have offered their bodies to God insofar as they can control the outcome. And in union with Abraham, whenever a parent offers his or her child to God and gives them the freedom and encouragement to pursue the religious life or the priesthood, they make a sacrifice of their bodies. And all of us give our bodies in sacrifice every time that we fast or abstain for the sake of obeying the precepts of the church or to grow in other virtues, especially chastity and self-control. So it is the case that by a married person's observing chastity, which is aided by fasting and abstinence and other godly disciplines, they too prepare themselves for martyrdom and are far more ready for persecution and hardship than our worldly people who disregard chastity. The greatest sacrifice pertains to our souls. Inner devotion by way of prayer and other interior acts is what Thomas calls the principal sacrifice. We know this is the case from the offering of Melchizedek. He offered only bread and wine to God, which does not amount to much materially speaking. But since he offered him with a pure heart and a relation to Christ's offering of himself, it was an acceptable sacrifice and one that we remember for all ages. Thus we know that though a man should give generously of alms to the church, if his heart is not in it, or he does not sanctify his offering of money by the offering of his own life in prayer and devotion, his sacrifice is of little significance in God's eyes. The Lord wants the heart much more than he wants material sacrifices. Going back to the secret for today's Mass, Abel is mentioned as a particularly apt example of holy sacrifice. This is because Abel offered his soul, body, and his possessions to the Lord in a perfect manner. Recalling the story from Genesis chapter 4, we know that Abel's sacrifice was accepted while his brother Cain's was not accepted. And what was the reason? Not the offering itself, but the spirit in which the offering was made. Abel offered the sacrifice of the lamb with all of his heart, and thus he offered himself when he offered the lamb, whereas Cain offered the vegetables with some other motive in mind, with a divided heart. And thus when he offered the vegetables, it was only about them and not about himself. But notice also, in a more deeper way, Abel offered his soul, and then offered his possessions, and then he completed that sacrifice by offering his body. There was good reason to think that Abel knew very well what Cain was asking of him when he asked him to go out into the field. Abel was a type of Christ, and Christ knew that when he went to the garden on Holy Thursday night, he would be apprehended, condemned, and killed. Abel never said a word, as far as we know, while he was in the field, and our Lord was like a sheep before the shearers and did not open his mouth, as Isaiah says. Abel offered himself in sacrifice for love of his brother, and that is why he's always been considered an image of Christ. In our own lives, we should take note of this example of Abel. We offer our souls to God in worship, in prayer, and spiritual sacrifice. We offer our goods to God by supporting the church and giving our time and our skills, whatever they may be. And the final, and in many ways, the most difficult sacrifices of our bodies, because it is, from a human standpoint, the ultimate sign of love. Not all of us are called to be martyrs, but all of us are called to be chaste, which is an offering of our bodies to God. And so often it is through the fatigue of our bodies that we fulfill our vocations, in taking care of an elderly parent, or in herding human kittens that make up your families, or in working hard day in and day out, in fulfilling the debt of conjugal love each time, in bearing children, in hearing confessions, and offering the liturgy for those of us in the sanctuary. In making such sacrifices of the body, each of us prepares in our own way for martyrdom. We prepare ourselves to go out into the field for love of our brethren, and we prepare ourselves to die so that others may live. Remember that although Abel had no idea, Cain had no idea what Abel was doing, Abel knew, and God saw his intention, and perhaps saved Cain through that. It is also the case with Paul and Stephen. Stephen offered himself for those who were persecuting him, and Paul was converted. So also we can offer ourselves, and the world doesn't know, and God accepts the sacrifice, and we can convert hearts on behalf of that sacrifice unknown to the world. May the Lord grant today that as we share in Christ's sacrifice through the gifts of the altar, our Lord may give us strength and courage to renew our own sacrifices of our possessions, our body, and our souls, and that we may imitate how generous Abel was. Nothing that is offered to God is offered in vain. Nothing. He is a God of justice, and He will make a return to us of everything that we sacrifice for love of Christ and for His body, which is the church. Please rise for the creed.